The obsidian room was designed to look expensive. Onyx underlights glowing amber, mirrors smudged with candle halos, and a jazz trio coasting on a bass line that curled around ankles and whispered that everything here cost more than it looked. Tonight, the sophistication felt like teeth. Ava Cole's pulse was a runaway drumline in her throat, swallowing the room, making the tiny bubble on her champagne glass cling and tremble. Her phone vibrated in her palm again. He's here with her. Don't do anything crazy. The message from her best friend bit like ice. Too late, she thought. Too late to stop the tidal wave that had already risen. She lifted her eyes, and there they were. Tucked into a velvet booth that swallowed secrets whole sat her boyfriend of 3 years, Nathan Price, his face half in shadow, half bathed in that ugly amber light, and leaning so close into him that her perfume probably soaked into his suit jacket, was the woman from his office, the one he had sworn was just a colleague, just someone he mentored. Tessa. Tessa with the precise eyeliner and the laugh that skittered like cracked glass on tile. Tessa, whose manicured hand rested easily on his thigh like it had always belonged there. Nathan's fingers were threaded through her hair. They weren't having a friendly chat. They were a living, breathing confirmation of every 3 a.m. doubt that had crept past Ava's defenses. It hit Ava in the chest, cold and sharp, stealing her breath and pinning her ribs. She stood immobile, a statue carved from heartbreak and fluorescent humiliation. For a beat, maybe 2, she didn't exist as a woman at all, only as an open nerve. Then something inside her swung, a pendulum whipping from hurt to fury, with a speed that warmed her face and steadied her spine. The humiliation simmered into a burn so clean it felt like truth. She moved, one foot, then the other, the room tightening to a tunnel with 2 people at the end. Her whole life narrowed to the booth where Nathan smiled like a liar who still believed he was charming. Nathan? Her voice came out level, even lush with calm. He looked up, and that smile faltered the tiniest bit before it hardened into something like annoyance. A man inconvenienced by a delivery not meant for him. "Ava, what are you doing here?" he asked, as if he'd bumped into her in a grocery store aisle. "I could ask you the same," she said, dipping her eyes to Tessa. The other woman's confidence sloped off her face by degrees. Tessa's hand slid from Nathan's thigh, fingers fluttering to her martini glass. Nathan sighed and dragged his hand through his carefully arranged hair, as though he might find an answer tucked behind his right ear. He didn't even bother to play contrite. He didn't blush. He didn't stammer. He went bored. "Look, Ava, let's not make a scene." "A scene?" The laugh that broke from her was an unfamiliar thing, small and sharp. "You're cheating on me in a room filled with our clients and friends, the same people who will chit-chat about this over oysters for the next 6 months, and you're worried about me making a scene?" He stood, his expression curdling into cruelty, into the kind of meanness that liked to act like honesty. "All right, you want truth?" He lowered his voice as if he were about to gift her something precious. "What did you expect?" "I need someone on my level. Someone exciting." He tilted his head at Tessa. "You're comfortable, Ava. Pretty, predictable. She's a challenge." The words landed like slaps he didn't even have to lift his hands for. He wasn't content to break her heart. He needed to grind a heel into it in public, where it would stain the velvet. Ava felt her eyes go hot, and then, like a fire-catching dry brush, a thought flared so brightly it seared away the urge to cry. She was not going to slink out. She was not going to be the girl who breaks. She was going to leave a mark. She let her gaze sweep the room and find a focal point at the polished obsidian bar. A man sat alone at the counter, posture easy, presence dense. Tall, the kind of tall that made even a well-cut suit look like it had been made for him. Dark hair clipped close, a jaw that had opinions. He had a stillness that hummed like a generator, quiet power, the rare kind that sucked sound from around him. His watch caught the low light and threw it back like a promise. He was, without question, the most formidable person in the room. "Perfect," her anger hissed. She turned her back on Nathan like he was something to be left at the curb. She crossed the room, her heels neat and ruthless on the concrete floor, ears ringing with jazz and blood. The man looked up as she approached, gray eyes cool and curious, the kind of gaze that dissected and catalogued and never seemed to surprise itself. Ava didn't speak. She reached up, fingers curling into the lapel of his suit. Someone's careful hand-stitched initial winked on the inside and pulled him toward her. Then she kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't polite. It was gasoline on a match. Heat and hunger and defiance poured straight through her lips. 3 years of love and one violent night of betrayal emptied into a single, reckless, glorious act. The world dropped out. The jazz cut. There was her mouth and his. The taste of cold gin and citrus. The shock. The reckless relief. For half of one heartbeat, his body went still. Surprise, disbelief. But then his hand found the small of her back, warm and sure, and he pulled her closer. The controlled pressure of his mouth turned possessive, a quiet suggestion that shocked her with how much it soothed. She broke the kiss finally, breathless, her lips stung and tingling. She didn't look at the stranger. She turned back toward the velvet booth. Nathan's jaw had unhinged, his eyes blown wide with something like horror tangled with indignation. "Turns out, Nathan," she said, letting her voice ring, letting it travel, letting it climb up to the mezzanine and tuck itself into every corner. "I was looking for something more exciting, too." She pivoted and walked. The air parted, then clung. Heads turned and pretended not to. She could feel the stranger's gaze between her shoulder blades, and the sudden hush washing over the obsidian room as stories wrote themselves in other people's mouths. At the door, she didn't look back. Monday morning hit Lumina Design Studio like a red-eye flight. The open floor plan hummed and buzzed. Coffee machines coughed. Someone was microwaving oatmeal that smelled like childhood. Ava buried herself in work, in grids and glyphs, in palettes and kerning. Small, controllable things, neatly beveled edges she could push and pull until the world made sense. Avoiding Nathan's texts had become a sport. Declining his calls, muscle memory. Her mind wasn't done replaying the night. Oh God, she had kissed a stranger. She had kissed him like a promise and a dare and a scream. Even in the clean daylight of Lumina's bright windows, heat climbed up her neck when she thought of it. At her desk, her coworker Noah swung his chair around with the solemnity of a surgeon. "There's a buzz," he muttered, waggling his eyebrows over his rimless glasses. "Got the email." On cue, every monitor in the studio dinged, and a red-flagged message slid into inboxes with the subtlety of a siren. Subject: emergency, all hands, do not miss. The body was short and catastrophic. Lumina Design Studio had been acquired, effective immediately. They were now part of Mercer Global Media, a leviathan that swam in deeper water than any of them had ever touched. By 11, the conference room, glass walls, planted ficus trees, sleek chairs that made bad backs worse, was shoulder to shoulder. The air tasted like fear and peppermint. Ava squeezed in beside Noah. "Well, so much for creative freedom," he whispered, lips barely moving. "I hear the Mercer people set KPIS for their KPIS." "I just hope whoever's steering the ship appreciates the art," she whispered back, "and keeps us off any rocks." The HR director shuffled onto the little stage, Mr. Alvarez, the kind man who remembered birthdays and never stopped looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. He cleared his throat and smoothed a hand down a tie that was trying to strangle him. "Good morning, everyone. As you know, today is a day of significant transition for Lumina. It is my honor to introduce the visionary leader who will be guiding us into this new future. Please welcome our new CEO, Mr. Julian Mercer," someone breathed, like a prayer or a curse. The man who stepped onto the stage had gravity, the stranger from the bar, the one with the gray eyes that evaluated and acquired. He stood in the soft stage light and somehow absorbed it, somehow bent it around him. In that tailored suit, he wore power like knit cotton. His gaze slid across them all, efficient, dispassionate, until it tripped, until it landed and paused on her. Ava's heart misfired. There was no dramatic shift in his expression, no twitch of a smile or a frown. But in his eyes, there, just there, a flicker of recognition, a flash of surprise that could have been amusement or danger or both. She felt the blood drain from her face, and then rush back, hot enough to sear. The air in her lungs thinned to paper. Julian spoke about synergy and alignment and efficiencies like he was reading from a script the world had always handed people like him. In anyone else's voice, it would have been white noise. Coming from him, every syllable slid like a blade, clean, controlled, promising to cut into her life. She caught Noah watching her from his periphery, his brows pinched together like he was doing math. She could only stare at the man whose mouth she had bruised with anger. When the speech ended, he descended from the stage with a predator's patience, moving through the crowd without touching anyone and somehow moving everyone. Ava wished herself into invisibility. It didn't take. He stopped in front of her as if there were a magnet under her feet and a metal plate in his chest. "Ms. Cole, isn't it?" he said, his voice even. It wasn't big, but it carried. The little hairs on Ava's arms rose at the tone more than the words. His eyes did not match his voice. They were bright with something sharp. "I was reviewing personnel files this morning," he continued, extending a hand that looked deceptively relaxed. Promising talent. There was nothing to do but put her hand in his. His palm was warm. The contact was brief, and yet she felt the echo of his hand on her back from Saturday night roll through her like a summer storm. "I'd like to see you in my office in 5 minutes," he said, dropping his voice so that only she caught it. "We have a great deal to discuss about your future here." The short walk to the penthouse floor felt like a march toward a gallows she had accidentally built with her own 2 hands. Ava's calves went rubbery on the staircase. The corridor outside his new office smelled like lemon oil and brand new carpet and money. Her mind went feral. How? Why? Oh God, no! She knocked. The heavy door swallowed the sound. "Enter," came the controlled reply. She pushed in, and it was like stepping into a different climate. Where her previous boss's office had been an explosion of sticky notes and mismatched frames, this space was a cathedral of glass and steel. Minimalist, expensive, a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline carving itself against a pale sky. A desk big enough to land a helicopter on commanded the center. The man from the bar stood by a wall of window with his back to her, the city a suggestion beyond him. "Close the door," he said without turning. She did, and the soft click echoed like a gavel. He turned, slowly, taking her in like something he didn't mind taking apart. His face was composed, his eyes were not. They danced with dark amusement, with something verging on satisfaction. "What a performance, Ms. Cole," he said, his voice smooth and low, like he'd set it to a setting called Silken Mockery. "The most unforgettable introduction I've ever had to a new employee." He walked around her in a measured circle, like a collector considering a sculpture he was tempted to purchase. The audacity, the passion, the impulse, risky, effective. "Mr. Mercer," she began, her voice a raw whisper in a dry room. I'm sorry. I had no idea who you were. It was unprofessional. A mistake." "A mistake?" He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could read the fine stitching of his tie. "I don't think so." He said it like a man who never had to think twice about anything. "It was calculated, desperate, emotional, yes. But you wanted to wound an adversary, and you did, very effectively." The faint, clean scent of his cologne pushed at a memory of the bar, of his hand on her back, the firm heat of his mouth. He leaned in just enough to make the world tilt. "The problem, Ava," he said softly, using her first name like a claim, making it sound intimate and dangerous at once, "is that your passion and your recklessness are now my assets. And I don't allow my assets to behave unpredictably." She tried to breathe. She tried to find the sensible thing a sensible person would say.
"I understand,"
she said finally, the words tasting like ash.
"I'll clear out my desk."
He let out a short laugh, humorless and genuine, the way dark coffee is genuine. "Fire you? Number. That would be simple. That would mean I never get to enjoy the delicious irony on offer here. And I do love irony." He moved back to his desk with a grace that made the furniture look slow. "Your position on the junior design team no longer exists." Ava felt the bottom drop. "What?" "From this moment, you are my personal design liaison." The title sounded like champagne poured over handcuffs. You report directly and only to me. He let the silence bloom before he cut into it. You will work on my priority projects. You will be at my disposal. Your desk will be moved to the anteroom just outside this office. He had isolated her neatly, made her an island in an office archipelago. He had positioned her so that she would live in his gravity every day, every hour. Consider it a unique opportunity, he said, and his smile was almost gentle, if you hadn't seen what it could do. A chance to demonstrate that your passion isn't reserved for dramatic displays in bars. You wanted exciting. Your life is about to become very exciting. Ava stood very still as the full shape of the nightmare sat down inside her. She hadn't just kissed a stranger, she had kissed her new boss. Her one wild act of revenge had welded itself into a sentence. Her world tipped on its axis and didn't right itself by morning. Her new desk gleamed like a little boat in the clean, white sea outside Julian's door. The hum and chatter of Lumina's collaborative floor below were sounds that reached her muffled and wrong. People walked past and gave her either pity smiles or strained, neutral nothings. She could see in their eyes that she'd been moved to that place everyone talked about, but nobody wanted to touch. The CEO's personal design liaison. The words rasped with gossip. Julian didn't waste time. He called her in with a flick of his gaze. Your first task is to redesign the corporate logo for Mercer Global Media, he said, casual like he was ordering lunch. Ava felt the blood in her wrists go thin. The Mercer mark was etched into skyscrapers and deals. It was an institution. Designers in their 60s had built careers off evolving it a millimeter at a time. And he wanted a new one, in a week. Our current identity is stale, he said, leaning back, lacing his fingers. It lacks vision. It needs new life. He let his eyes slide to hers on the word life and allowed it to hang there too long to be accidental. It needs passion. I want to see preliminary concepts by the end of the week. She could have argued. She could have thrown the design cannon at him. Instead, she nodded, because she had no room to do anything else. She knew a test when she tasted one. This was fire, and he had thrown her into it. For 4 days, Ava made herself into a forge. She ate trail mix at her desk and slept in the whispery hour before dawn. She filled sketchbooks and trash cans. She made mood boards that looked like broken windows and others that looked like prayers. She toggled between corporate branding theory and her own stubborn taste, drank coffee until her body vibrated like a wire. She was not going to give him the satisfaction of watching her fail. At night, the office was a hushed thing, all footsteps and HVAC sighs. She was often the last person out besides Julian, who treated his office like a habitat. He moved past her desk without speaking, but she could feel his attention like a hand around a wrist, cool, clinical, assessing. The war between them changed its shape. It wasn't made of words, it was made of refusal. On the last night, she pinned 3 concepts to a board in his office, the city throwing cold stars at the glass. She had pared them back and sharpened them, argued with herself, argued with dead designers in her head. She didn't hear him come in until he spoke. You're still here. The deadline is tomorrow, she said, not turning, her voice smaller than the room. Exhaustion had sanded off her filters. He studied the work in a quiet that felt like weight. One was bold, a clean evolution of the existing mark. Another, revolutionary, a tilted geometry meant to break expectations and reset the brand's posture. The third, she had wanted it to feel like air, was a minimalist monogram with space around it like respect, paired with a modern human font that looked like it would treat people well. His silence deepened until it made her want to fill it with apologies she didn't owe. Finally, he touched the edge of the third. This, he said, tapping it, is strong. Clean. Intelligent. He paused. But your font choice is weak. It lacks authority. I disagree, she said, turning that word like a blade. The sans serif is modern and approachable. It signals a shift toward transparency. An authoritative serif would drag us backward. It's predictable. He turned to her, the room catching. "Are you calling my judgment predictable, Miss Cole?" The words hung above them like something fragile and combustible. He stepped into her space, the air around him too warm. They were close enough that her breath had to decide whether to belong to her or to the room between them. His eyes dropped to her mouth like they remembered what it could do, and suddenly the obsidian room, the kiss, the heat, rose like a ghost between them. He leaned in. His breath brushed her cheek. Her heartbeat stuttered against her ribs like it wanted out. For a second so full, it stretched. She thought he would kiss her again, that he would fold every contradiction and insult into something they could both sink their teeth into. And then he pulled back. The mask slid back onto his face with a practiced ease. "The deadline is 9, he said, voice low and even, like nothing had rippled. "Don't disappoint me." He left. Ava stood among paper and glass, trembling with anger, and something more shameful that she refused to name. In the morning, after a review that could have snapped her, the minimalist mark, hers, was chosen. Predictably, Julian took full credit on the official channels. He talked about guiding the vision. He did not say her name, but in the whisper threads that ran between art directors and creative leads in the city, the truth sprinted. Ava Cole had conceived a mark that made people feel the power, not just see it. She breathed for the first time in days. It wasn't triumph exactly, it was oxygen. It lasted 12 hours. Nathan heard the news. A friend texted him a gossip piece with a photo of Ava entering Mercer Tower. He pieced it together. She hadn't been fired. She was the right hand of the billionaire she had kissed, like she meant it. Something toxic ignited in him. He went to Mercer Tower like he was going to collect a debt. The lobby was marble and sunlight and money. He announced himself to the receptionist with a voice too big for the space. "I'm here to see Ava Cole." "Do you have an appointment, sir?" the receptionist asked, polite to a fault, professional walls already rising. "I don't need an appointment," Nathan said, too loud, leaning in like his breath had value. "She'll see me. We have unfinished business." Then, conspiratorially, for the benefit of those within hearing distance, "Amazing how fast some people climb when they start sleeping with the boss, isn't it?" The receptionist's eyes did a quick dance of shock before settling into protocol. She signaled security with a subtlety born of practice, and, understanding the sensitivity, called upstairs directly. At her desk, Ava felt the hum of commotion like a change in weather. She knew that voice. She stood and went to the glass doors of the executive suite, looked down into the bright lobby, and saw him, his stance belligerent, his mouth moving recklessly. Shame burned so hot in her she thought she might shake apart. Before she could move, Julian's door opened behind her. He passed her without breaking stride, his face empty in a way that scared her more than anger. "Stay here," he said, his voice gone to that low place that meant don't argue. He didn't take the elevator. He took the broad staircase that spilled into the lobby like a ribbon, his steps measured, controlled. Conversations died as if someone had pulled a plug. The building seemed to find a new center of gravity at the base of the stairs, where he stopped inches from Nathan. "You must be Mr. Price," Julian said, his tone absolute zero. "Nathan," he corrected, fighting his voice out through a tightening throat. "I don't care what your name is," Julian replied, dialed down further still. "Ms. Cole is occupied, doing the brilliant work her talent warrants. Work that matters to the future of my company. You are trespassing and harassing one of my most valued employees." He stepped closer, Nathan's bravado deflated by degrees. He flinched. "This is the only time I will say this," Julian continued, each word precisely placed. "Security will escort you out. If you set foot in this building again, if you contact Ms. Cole in any form, if I even overhear you say her name in a public space, the full weight of Mercer Global's legal department will descend on you. We will dismantle your career, your reputation, your finances with such surgical precision that you will spend the rest of your life wishing you had never learned to form the syllables of her name. Are we understood?" Nathan nodded, swallowing hard, face drained of color. "Good," Julian said simply. He turned from Nathan like a verdict and looked up. His eyes found Ava through the glass above. For a fraction of a second, the lethal calm in his face broke into something else, concern, unmistakable and unhidden. "Are you okay?" he asked. Not loud, but the sound carried. She nodded because she couldn't trust her voice. He didn't use her shame against her. He didn't gloat or turn the knife. Instead, he had defended her publicly, thoroughly, without a stutter. He'd wrapped the situation in that cold, ruthless efficiency of his and turned it all in one motion into a shield. And somehow it made everything worse and better at the same time. Her heart did something she couldn't control. The air in the office changed after that. What had been a messy rumor mill turned into something like respect, even from people who didn't want to give it. Julian's stance put a fence around her. It didn't make him kinder as a boss, it made him more complicated as a person. 2 weeks later, he punctured that thin new calm. He appeared in the anteroom like a weather front. "Pack a bag," he said, not breaking stride. "We're going to Barcelona. Design exposition. Wheels up in 3 hours." The whirlwind tasted like espresso and jet lag and possibility. Barcelona opened her arms with warm brick and sea-wet air. The exposition at Fira Gran Via was a thicket of ideas and egos. During daylight hours, she and Julian moved as a unit. They debated sign systems and interface friction with a precision that made Ava feel shiveringly alive. They critiqued installations with sliced phrases and unexpected praise that made interns flush. Absorbed talks about wayfinding and inclusive typography. Collected textures and threads and tones like magpies. At night, the lines softened. Under the pretense of client dinners and market research, they let Barcelona seep into them. They split plates of patatas bravas and anchovies at a tiny bodega in Elborn, elbows bumping, arguing whether Gaudí was a genius or an indulgence. They walked under laundry-strung alleys where the air carried guitar music and the smell of olive oil and warm stone. He told her about his favorite bridges. She teased him for knowing the weight of the word cantilever too well. On their last night, after a day that felt like a win, they returned to their hotel suite, a high floor with a balcony that seemed to pour them into the sky. The spires of the Sagrada Familia tangled against the dusk like a dream still under construction. "A successful trip," Julian said, loosening his tie with a little sigh she'd never heard him allow around anyone else. He poured wine like they did this often. Maybe in some other life they did. "Very," Ava said, taking the glass, letting her fingers brush his by accident and then by choice. They stepped onto the balcony and let the city move below them, a river of headlights and laughter. When he spoke her name, it sounded different. Less like an order, more like a fact. He leaned his forearms on the rail, turning to face her, the lights of Barcelona making his eyes look softer than they had a right to be. "I have to ask, that night at the bar, why me?" She watched one of the cranes swing in slow meditation over the cathedral. "I was hurt," she said, and the honesty came more easily in that warm air. "I was angry. I wanted to hurt him back." "And me?" he pressed gently. She met his gaze. "You looked like the most powerful man in the room." She shook her head. "I wanted to aim my pain at something too big to notice it." He was quiet for a few seconds that felt important. He moved closer. Heat rolled off his skin like a tide. "And what if I kissed you now, Ava?" he asked, voice gone frank and low. "No revenge, no audience, no games." Her breath caught. Every muscle sharpened. She had spent days pretending there wasn't a cord between them. Now it sang. He lifted his hand and framed her face with a touch so careful it made her ache. His thumb slipped along her cheekbone like a secret. His eyes were open, and she could read the unguarded thing in them. He leaned in slowly, and she couldn't do anything but tilt toward him, eyes falling closed like yes. He stopped a heartbeat away, breathing out a sharp, frustrated sound that hurt to hear. His hand fell away as if he'd touched fire. He turned and gripped the iron railing tight enough to whiten his knuckles. "We have an early flight," he said, voice scraped raw. "Get some sleep." He didn't look back. She stayed on the balcony and tried to breathe around the shape of something she almost had. The flight home was quiet in new and dangerous ways. The almost kiss rode back with them, sat between them in the car from O'Hare, followed them through the revolving doors of Mercer Tower. It made everything after feel like walking on glass in thick socks, bearable and unbearable at once.
Back in Chicago, he built walls fast as steel. He threw himself into work with a fever. His interactions with her snapped shut like briefcases. The intimacy of Barcelona felt like a trick her body had played on her. She folded herself back into her designs and tried not to crumble under the question that charged the air when he was anywhere close. Why did he pull away? Weeks later, while she wrestled his calendar into an order that didn't exist, she saw it. A block of time, every third Thursday, 3 hours carved out and labeled with one sterile word: Clinic. Unlike the rest, it didn't list a conference call with Singapore or a board meeting in LA or a pitch review. It just hovered there, secret and solid. Her stomach dipped. Was he sick? But he moved like a man whose body did exactly what he told it to. 3 hours every month. Her curiosity, an occupational hazard, caught and held. When he was locked in a board meeting, she slid a private browser window open like a confession and typed the clinic's name. Maple Bridge Hospice Center. Not a hospital, not a private doctor's office. A place where people went to be cared for when there was nothing to fix. The breath left her like someone had knocked it out. She dug in deeper, the way she did when she needed a typeface nobody else had heard of. She ran searches through public filings, charity databases, Gala Program PDFS, the places where rich people's secrets sometimes left fingerprints. It took 2 hours, but she found a list of anonymous donors in an old philanthropic article. One had given enough to fund an entire new wing. The dedication line knocked her cold. In memory of Eleanor Mercer, a beloved mother, gone 5 years, degenerative neurological disease. The things she didn't like about him, the control, the crisp cruelty, the way he could make everyone else bend, lost their edges in the light of that one truth. It wasn't arrogance, it was armor. He was a man who had built an empire around the hole someone left in him. A man who had watched the person he loved most fade in slow motion, helpless with money in his pockets and power in his hands. Control became his religion because he had learned in the ugliest church that some things refused to be commanded. She sat back from her monitor, the blue light painting her in a color she didn't recognize. The resentment she had nurtured, against his walls, his games, his denials, evaporated like fog in sun. He hadn't pulled away on that balcony in Barcelona to hurt her. He had pulled away to keep from drowning. She looked at the closed door of his office and, for the first time, didn't see the billionaire boss she was supposed to resent. She saw a son carrying a grief that had not learned how to sit quietly. She saw a man who was alone in the way people with too much money and too much expectation and too much power are, surrounded and starving. On the third Thursday of the month, the morning of his quiet appointment, the office found a different version of him. He was all sharp corners and thunder. He cut people down to slivers for typos and breathed ice over meetings where he usually only exhaled strategy. At her desk, he tossed a proof like it had done him personal harm. "Unacceptable, Ava," he said, voice tight like piano wire. "The kerning's off by a fraction." The old version of her would have bristled, would have met his fire with hers. The new one watched him and saw nothing to fight. "I'll redo it," she said, and did, and kept doing until his restlessness ate through the day and he dismissed everybody with, "I have an appointment." She watched him leave and knew he was going to sit in a room with a different kind of quiet. She couldn't stand the idea of him coming back to a floor emptied of noise and oxygen. So she stayed. Hours later, the private elevator chimed like a whisper. He walked out looking humanized in a way that felt obscene to witness. Jacket gone, tie stuffed into his pocket, shirt wrinkled, edges undone. He didn't see her. He went to his office like a man going to ground. She gave him minutes, then slipped in. The room was dark, except for the glow of the city. He stood by a credenza, a glass of whiskey in his hand. In a frame, a woman smiled out, her eyes the same gray as his. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Julian," she said softly, not moving closer yet. He spun, the emotion on his face going from anger to shock and back in seconds. "What are you still doing here? I told everyone to go." "I know." She stepped forward like you step toward a stray animal, slow, unthreatening.
I didn't think you should be alone tonight."
"I don't need a babysitter," he snapped. But the edges of it were worn. The words landed tired.
"I know," she said, steady. "Maybe you could use a friend." Her refusal to be pushed away drew the fight out of his shoulders. He exhaled and looked 15. "Today's the anniversary," he said finally, voice barely there. "The day she died." His armor scraped off him all at once. He wasn't the CEO of anything. He was a son with a hole punched through him. She was everything, he managed. And I couldn't do anything. I could buy machines and doctors and words. None of it mattered. He swallowed hard. I could not control it. In that moment, Ava didn't reach for words like sorry. She stepped closer and took the glass from his shaking hand and set it on the desk. Then she took his hand. His fingers were cold, his grip was not. He held on like the ground had tilted and she was the most stable thing in the room. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a move. It was the kind of human contact that keeps people from floating away. He looked down at their hands, then up at her, eyes bright with the tears he wouldn't let fall. Something in the space between them, boss and employee, tormentor and tormented, dissolved so completely it wasn't even ash. The weeks that followed were strange and tender in the way small miracles are. The tension remained, but it had swapped war for awareness. He still demanded, he still sharpened, but the blade lacked that appetite for blood. When he looked at her now, there was an understanding there, a gratitude he didn't know how to frame. They worked late, not because he built prisons from deadlines, but because they had become a machine made of two people that hummed when it turned. The rebranding neared completion. The pitch deck gleamed. They were the last in the building the night they finished, just them, 1,000 pixels settling into place, and the city sighing beyond the glass. Ava stepped back and let the relief roll through her. "It's done," she said, and for a second pride rose and loosened her shoulders. "It's perfect," he murmured, stepping nearer. He went to the little bar tucked behind a panel like a trick and pulled a bottle free. "This demands celebration." They clinked flutes, bubbles fizzing in the silence between them. "To the new Mercer Global," he said, "and to its brilliant designer," he added, eyes warm and present and not afraid. "We make a good team," she said, voicing the thing that had lived under her tongue for weeks. "We do," he agreed, voice slipping down to that register that made her knees untrustworthy. He set his glass down and took hers, aligning them like an intention. He took a step closer, and the room changed temperature. Comfortable warmth thrown out, and something electric taking its place. "Ava," he said, and this time her name was a promise, not a warning. He lifted his hand and cupped her cheek, his thumbs rougher than they looked. It was the same touch from Barcelona, but something was gone, hesitation. He leaned in slowly, giving her every inch of space to say no. She didn't. She closed the last bit of distance. The second kiss was nothing like the first. The first had been a grenade lobbed in a crowded room. This one was surrender, a laying down of arms. It was slow, time dilated around it, full of catching breaths and adjustments as they found a rhythm that felt like coming home. It tasted like champagne and relief and something they both refused to call hope. It said, "I see you." It said we survived something. It said we could build something else. When they pulled apart, they were breathless and different. She looked at him with her hands at the sides of his face. It felt like the ground had finally stopped wobbling. The game was done. The war had dissolved. What stood between them now had a name that scared and soothed in equal measure. The morning after, the world looked saturated, like someone had bumped up the color. When Ava walked into Mercer Tower, the lobby's marble threw light at her like a blessing. In the office, she tried to pretend nothing had shifted wildly inside her. She made notes. She clicked through slides. She caught herself watching the door to his office the way you watch the horizon from a beach you love. Mid-morning, he summoned her to go over final tweaks. The pretense of professionalism fit them like a borrowed coat. He stood too close. His hand brushed hers when they reached for the same key. His eyes found hers and warmed there before he dragged them back to bullet points. The charge between them ran like a private current. Of course, nothing stays private in a corporate ecosystem built on open plans and Slack. People noticed the change in him, because the change in him was a shift in gravity. The cold, blade-edged CEO had melted into something that occasionally smiled. And the only person who seemed to get that smile more than the others was his personal design liaison. The whispers began like wind in tall grass. They grew louder under coffee foam mustaches. Her former department head, Greg Sutton, irritated ever since her desk had relocated to power, stirred the pot with vicious little spoons. "It's obvious," he muttered to his team, loud enough to be overheard by anyone who wanted to be. "She slept her way past the rest of you. That logo? Please. Think he didn't whisper that idea into her pretty little ear?" The rumor spread like something viral. Ava could feel it on her skin. Work that had taken her soul and nights and sanity became, in certain mouths, the byproduct of an affair. People who had once braved the cafeteria with her now avoided eye contact, or offered pity disguised as neutrality. It was a different kind of isolation, and it stung worse. Before, they had feared her proximity. Now they despised it. After the board presentation, a triumph by every metric, the board fell over themselves congratulating Julian on empowered leadership and Ava on visionary design. Julian, to his credit, credited her publicly and precisely. "The vision and brilliance behind this new identity belong entirely to Ms. Cole," he said into the mic, letting the truth fill the room. It backfired in the worst way. The acknowledgement sounded, in resentful ears, like the CEO making sure his favorite got a cookie. Later, in a corridor, Ava heard Greg sneer to a clutch of eager listeners. Of course he gave her credit. "Gotta keep the pet happy." The words weren't just barbed, they were poisonous. They cheapened every late night, every panic attack she'd quieted with work, every piece of herself she had poured onto boards and screens. She stood and understood with brutal clarity. As long as she was here under his title, no one would ever believe her success belonged to her. The thing she loved most, her work, was becoming a weapon used against her. The joy of loving him was being salted by contempt she had not earned. That night, she knocked on his door and walked into a room where he turned toward her with a softness that had once been unthinkable. He smiled, the private smile that made something flutter in her chest. "Perfect timing," he said, hanging up a call with the smoothness of a man who never had to be kept waiting. "I was just going to order dinner." That new Italian on state, "Julian, we need to talk," she said, and the words were a blade she pressed against her own heart first. The smile dropped. His eyes narrowed in concern. He read pain the way some people read bar graphs. "What is it?" She put a white envelope on his desk. It was such a small thing to change so much. "My letter of resignation." He stared at it like it might hiss. Then at her. "What? Why? If this is about us," he circled the desk, hands up. "I don't care what people think," he said, too fast. "I don't. I have never." "But I do," she said, voice shaking but steadying itself with each word. "I can't be the boss's girlfriend. I can't have every success attributed to your favor. I've worked too hard to get here. My talent, my work, it has to be mine. It's the only thing that is truly mine." He reached for her arms and held them carefully, as if she were a bird he wanted to keep but refused to cage. "Then I'll protect you," he said, desperate, bleeding through. "I'll fire them. Greg, anyone, I'll make it clear you earned every inch." She shook her head, tears slipping free despite how hard she bit the inside of her cheek. "That makes it worse, Julian. That proves their point. That's the narrative they want. The woman who gets people fired because she sleeps with the CEO, she swallowed the lump. You can't protect me from this. Your power is the problem." The truth hit him like a clean shot. He had spent his whole life solving things with force and precision, and here was a knot that tightened when he pulled. "If what we have is real," she said, each word a step she'd already taken inside herself, "it has to survive outside these walls, outside your shadow. I can't be your employee and your partner. I have to choose." She shut her eyes once and opened them. I choose me. I choose my self-respect.
Pain opened his face. He looked like a man dropped from a great height. "So, that's it?" he asked, voice ragged. "You're just leaving?"
I have to, she said, and when she slipped out of his hands, she felt the shape of the loss in her bones. She left the letter there, like a white flag in a war she couldn't fight without losing something she couldn't get back. Then she walked out of his office, out of the building, out of the future she had started to let herself imagine with him.
The day after was the longest of his life.
Julian didn't know what to do with the silence that sat outside his door like a ghost. He stared at her resignation until the words blurred. Your power is the problem. He had built a fortress out of it, and it was crushing the only person who had ever made him want to dismantle the ramparts. He had two options: accept that his world poisoned what he loved, or change his world. By 10 the next morning, an emergency all hands was announced. The room filled with people who whispered like they couldn't help it. He walked on stage, stripped of that armor he wore like a suit. He looked human. It was a shock.
"I've called you here to address the recent departure of Ava Cole," he began, voice calm. A rustle, heads tilted. "There have been rumors about Ms. Cole's role in this company, and about her relationship with me." He paused long enough to let their assumptions shiver. "Let me be perfectly clear. Ava Cole is the most talented, innovative, and dedicated designer I have ever had the privilege to work with. The success of our rebrand is hers. Her vision has set our course." He let it sit. People shifted. Greg looked down. "Ms. Cole resigned because the culture in this office, a culture that I am responsible for, made her feel that her talent belonged to someone else. That is a failure of leadership." He let his gaze cut across the room like a wind. "My failure." The silence went thick. People stared. No one had heard him say those words before. "Effective immediately," he said, eyes finding Greg. "Gregory Sutton will be transferred to head our new satellite office in Juneau. I'm sure his leadership will be appreciated there." A gasp rippled, then died. It wasn't just a transfer. It was a message. He made sure everyone read it. "This company will be a meritocracy," he said, voice like a blade laid on a table. "We will not tolerate gossip, harassment, or undermining of talent. Your work will be the only thing that speaks for you." He took a breath like he'd run a long way. "As for me," he said, and a new vulnerability built in his tone like mist, "I've realized my leadership needs a different perspective." He let the next sentence land. "I'll be taking a 1-month leave of absence, starting now." Shock opened mouths. The formidable Mr. Mercer stepping away from the helm? He didn't fill the silence with justification. "I'm going to spend that time trying to win back the love and respect of the most brilliant woman I've ever met," he said. "Thank you." He left the stage to a vacuum. He'd walked away from the thing that had always defined him because he finally knew what mattered more. A friend from Lumina texted the phone light video to Ava. She watched in her tiny apartment with a dish in the sink and paint swatches on the wall from a project she hadn't had time to finish. She watched once, then again. The tears came quiet and constant. He hadn't defended her in whispers or behind closed doors. He had risked the only thing that ever made him feel safe, control, to say out loud that she mattered on her own. 2 days later, someone knocked. She opened the door to find Julian standing on the threshold of her ordinary life, wearing jeans and a gray sweater. No watch that cost more than her rent. No flowers. His hands were empty, his posture awkward, his smile the tentative kind she hadn't thought he had in him. 1-month leave, he said, almost shy. No board meetings, no emails, no conference calls. Just me. He stepped forward an inch. "Is that enough time to prove that I'm not just your boss?" Ava didn't answer with sentences. She opened the door wider and let him in. The month unwound like a ribbon. They didn't do anything that would read headline-worthy. They went to the Art Institute and argued about whether contemporary installations were gimmicks or grace. They walked by the lake and ate falafel on a bench, letting wind steal napkins. They cooked in her too-small kitchen, hips bumping, garlic perfuming everything, arguing about how crispy a pan of roasted Brussels sprouts should get. They watched bad movies and good ones, leaned against each other during the sad parts. He met her sisters and didn't bring a bottle of wine so expensive it would embarrass them.
He brought himself and washed the dishes. He told her about the boy who had made himself into a fortress because his mother's absence felt like collapse. She told him about the girl who sketched on grocery receipts because canvas was a luxury and who took on extra shifts so her family never saw the anxiety in her bank app. They disassembled the public armor they wore like uniforms and showed each other the soft animal underneath. They fell in love again, intentionally this time, not because trauma had yanked them into collision, but because choice did.
On the last day of his leave, they sat in the park where the trees finally decided to dress in green. "My month's up," he said quietly, taking her hand and braiding their fingers. "What does that mean for us?" she asked, fear raising its head like a thing trained too well not to.
He turned to her, gray eyes full of something so steady it would make anyone braver. "It means I go back to my job, but not to who I was, not after this. You changed me, Ava." He squeezed her hand once. "I love you. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it, whether I'm wearing a suit or your favorite worn-out hoodie." She had been the one who left. Now she had to be the one who stayed. She leaned in and kissed him slow. "Yes," she whispered. "That's enough." They walked back into Mercer Tower on Monday, not as rumor and shadow, but as a unit. Hands laced in a simple declaration. People looked and then looked away, respectful now in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The corporate atmosphere had shifted. His public vulnerability and Greg's exile had sent a message that made the gossip sodden and heavy until it sank. "Welcome back," he said quietly when he called her into his office, the coffee on his desk steaming in 2 cups, one of them exactly the obscene sweet she liked. "Your old desk is back downstairs. Your position is waiting." She smiled and shook her head. "Thank you, but I can't take it." He blinked, that corner of his mouth quirking the way it did when he was bracing for a hard number. "Ava, I thought—" He took a breath. "I thought we did," she said gently. "But inside this building, nothing's changed. I'd still be your employee. We'd be back under the same shadow." She pulled a professionally bound document out of her bag and put it on his desk. "A counteroffer," she said. He read the title. "Proposal for Cole Atelier, an independent creative agency." His brows rose. He looked up at her. "I'm not asking for my job back," she said, voice strong in exactly the way it had been weak when she gave him the envelope with her resignation. "I'm proposing a partnership. I launch my own design agency, a subsidiary of Mercer Global by investment only. I'm the CEO. I build my team. I manage my clients, including Mercer, and I own my P&L. You're not my boss. You're my primary investor and a board partner." He flipped pages. It was meticulous and brave. The financials were ambitious, but rooted. The client list she projected was bold and mostly attainable. The vision was a thing that made his chest ache with pride. "You're not asking me to hire you," he murmured, a smile starting in his eyes. "You're asking me to invest in you." "I am," she lifted her chin. "Bet on me, not as your girlfriend, but as a businesswoman." He stood and came around the desk, the document in his hand like a seal. He looked at her like the sun had done something miraculous. "It's the smartest investment I'll ever make," he said, and extended his hand. "Congratulations, Madam CEO." She took it. They shook as equals who chose partnership over hierarchy, respect over approval. Then he pulled her in and sealed it, the way they sealed things that mattered, with a kiss that felt like a signature. A year later, Cole Atelier was a controlled riot in a corner of Mercer Tower that had once been prohibitively sterile. Where Julian's office was a temple to straight lines, her floor lived. Plants grew unruly, music threaded through arguments and laughter, mood boards sprawled across walls like constellations. Her conference table was a battlefield and a feast table in one. Ava stood at its head and piloted her team through a final pitch for a major client, with a confidence that came from being the architect of her own ship. She saw where people needed a nudge or a compliment to get over the next idea hill. She saw where to cut and where to add. She was no longer the timid girl tucked under someone else's title. She was the leader she had wanted to see. Julian came in at the end, leaning against the frame and watching with the soft smile his board members would never see. Pride moved through him like warmth, Respect was the air. Later, in her office, where the view stole your breath the moment you looked up from your screen, a sleek trophy caught late sunlight. The National Design Guild had named Cole Atelier's Mercer rebrand the year's best. Ava ran a finger over the cool metal. Who would have thought, she mused, half to herself, that a vengeful kiss in a bar would end up here? Julian came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I would," he whispered, and she felt him smile. "Best investment I ever made." She laughed, leaning back into him. "I thought I was just a promising talent you took a risk on." "You were never a risk, Ava," he said, voice gone serious. "You were a sure thing. I just had to be smart enough to get out of your way." She turned in his arms so she could see his face. Love settled in her like something that had finally found the right house. "I'm glad you did." "Me too," he said, and kissed her. The kind of kiss that felt like choosing the same person again. Both of them meeting each other across a table they had built themselves. They were not a story about power swallowing love. They were a story about love remaking power into something that served. They were not an empire built on contracts and intimidation. They were an empire of two, crafted from mutual respect and shared ambition, and a devotion that let the other be exactly who they were, loudly. Outside, the city went on glittering and grinding, telling new stories with old heartbeats. Inside, they stood together in a room they made theirs, and knew the difference between the games people play to avoid the truth and the quiet vows people make when they're ready for it.